Potholes Coulee was created by multiple outburst floods from glacial Lake Missoula as recently as 15,000 years ago during the Ice Age. Since then, it has been frozen in time. The unusual nature of Potholes Coulee was first recognized by geologist J. Harlan Bretz back in the early 20th century. This topographic map of Potholes Coulee, published in 1910, immediately got the attention of Bretz as a new and mystified 27-year-old biology teacher in Seattle. A few years later, Bretz began forays into the unusual scablands of eastern Washington, including Potholes Coulee, before proposing his outrageous hypothesis for what he called the Spokane Flood. Since Bretz's initial hypothesis, geologists have since come to learn that there were dozens of cataclysmic outburst floods that occurred during the last ice age, as well as previous ice ages going back 1,000,000 years or more. Potholes Coulee is a pair of horseshoe-shaped tiered cataract canyons that cut across a ridgeline separating the Columbia River Valley from the elevated Quincy Basin. On this map, white areas are all above the maximum flood level, and the blue arrows show the direction of flood flow after rushing out of Grand Coulee. Potholes Coulee was created by erosion from Ice Age floods that overfilled the Quincy Basin before spilling westward into the adjacent Columbia Valley, 850 feet below. This incredible drop in water level over such a short distance caused floodwaters to furiously eat away at the underlying fractured basalt layers in a futile attempt to establish hydraulic equilibrium. At the same time, outburst floodwaters also spilled over at Frenchman Coulee, south of Potholes Coulee, as well as Crater Coulee to the north. Most floodwaters entering the Quincy Basin drain to the southeast through the Drumheller channels, which lies at a much lower elevation. For floodwaters to also drain across the western Quincy Basin at Potholes and Frenchman Coulees and Crater Coulee to create the spectacular recessional cataract canyons we see today requires that outburst floods fill the Quincy Basin almost instantaneously. If not a huge flood, then all the floodwaters would have simply drained through the lower elevation outlet at Drumheller channels. Just behind Potholes Coulee, the Quincy Lakes were scoured out, where Ice Age floods carved out a series of semi-parallel shallow channels into the basalt bedrock before cascading into the canyons below. Potholes Coulee is actually two separate coulees, divided by a narrow blade of basalt. At one time, before the Missoula floods, There were no coulees here, and the basalt bedrock was all connected as a single continuous surface. Later, outburst floodwaters spilling out of the Quincy Basin into the Columbia River Valley, far below, carved the coulees we see today by cataract recession. The Coulee progressively lengthened eastward with each successive outburst flood. Today, this pair of parallel coulees is occupied by the ancient lakes to the north and Dusty Lake to the south. Dual horseshoe-shaped cataract canyons of basalt, separated by a narrow blade of basalt, like this one at Potholes Coulee, is a recurring feature in the Channeled Scablands. Here are a few other examples of these unusual rock blades elsewhere within the Scablands of eastern Washington. Primitive Potholes Coulee is a wonderful place to wander and explore. Almost all of the Coulee is located on public, state lands and popular with hikers and fishermen. Erosion by megafloods along the walls of the coulees exposed several 15 to 16 million year old volcanic lava flows of Columbia River basalt. The Coulee floors, on the other hand, are covered mostly with bouldery flood deposits, some locally blanketed with giant current ripples. Huge and deep potholes carved into the basalt attest to the power and magnitude of circulating, swirling floodwaters, hundreds of feet deep, moving at freeway speeds. Let's examine other elements of the Coulee up close, like this phenomenally huge 1.3 mile long basalt blade that bisects Potholes Coulee.